Adaptation is a core element of film. We've been adapting stories from other mediums into movies since the very beginning of the medium. If something gets popular enough in any medium that isn't a movie, it'll very likely be made eventually into a film, be it a video game, a television series, or a book. Books are the most common medium that gets adapted into movies. Since the earliest days of film, we've been adapting stories like Cinderella, Frankenstein, Naked Lunch, and all sorts of other cultural landmarks. All sorts of written works important to our culture have been made into film, though obviously some are far better made than others. One tricky thing as a filmmaker you have to deal with when adapting is what to change. There simply cannot be an accurate one-to-one adaptation with anything, really. Mainly because each medium has completely different strengths and weaknesses. For example, books can feasibly be how long a writer needs or wants them to be. Whereas for film, you have a limited amount of time. Even for massively long adaptations like Lord of the Rings or Dune, they still have to grapple with the fact that there's only so much you could put on screen all at once. Because of this objective fact, books tend to be the rawest and most beloved versions of their stories. Yet, occasionally, you get the rare example of when a film adaptation is better than its source material. And here is when I bring up the Diary of a Wimpy Kid film trilogy, specifically the trilogy from 2010 to 2012. Because in my eyes, and likely many others, this is the definitive version of this story. These films were a unique example of a team coming together and making an adaptation that, on paper, probably wouldn't have made the greatest movie, but with enough creative license and willingness to shift things around, they made a trilogy of incredibly strong films. These films are oddly historical, not just for my personal life, but for the film industry too. This trilogy was really the last hurrah for live-action kids films. I mean, prior to these movies, we had the Spy Kids films, Holes, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Tim Burton, the live-action Scooby-Doo duology, and even the earlier Harry Potter movies. Even if you don't like some of these movies, I certainly don't care for Tim Burton's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, you can admit that these movies were massive hits. In the 2010s, the trend of live-action family films kind of started to die off. Everything had shifted into the teen dystopia or romantic fantasy genre. And I mean, I won't say you're in the wrong for liking these movies, but I definitely don't think these movies are for me. I mean, every time I try to watch the Twilight movies, there's at least 2 times per movie I either start laughing hysterically or ask, isn't this a little creepy? Thus, the style of live-action family movies started to sort of wind down, family movies primarily being run by animated features from here on out. The only other big live-action family hits from the 2010s that I can think of were The Muppets, the Paddington films, and yeah, that's all I can really think of. In a sense, I think this is what made these films so important to a whole generation of people who grew up with them. That generation being Gen Z. We grew up in a time where film was shifting and getting far more franchise leaning and less original IP making. These were the live-action kids films that we needed. Much like how kids generations before us had films like The Goonies, The Sandlot, Short Circuit, Little Rascals. I think you get what I'm getting at. But many of you are probably wondering, why? Why did these films leave such a big impact? And you can't deny their impact. Meme culture alone revives these movies every couple of years, as well as video essays like the one you're watching right now. So, follow along with me as I look back into the Diary of a Wimpy Kid, the goated trilogy. And I hope you enjoy the video. If you do, I'm not gonna tell you what to do, but I'd appreciate it if you commented, shared, and whatever you want to do. But just enjoy the video first, okay? But before we start talking about anything related to the movies, let's talk about the production history of the trilogy first, shall we? Like I said earlier, let's talk about the making of this trilogy. Obviously, all of these movies are adapted from the book series by Jeff Kinney. The first book was published April 1st, 2007, and it's still going. Wow, I actually don't know whether to be impressed or to be scared by this fact. Anyways, the book was an instant hit and sold all over the place. I remember in the school book fairs, it was the one series all the kids wanted to get a copy of. It was either that or Goosebumps. Except me, I was that one kid who was grabbing books like Percy Jackson. For some reason, that was always more my speed. A primary source of production information on the series was actually officially published as the Wimpy Kid Movie Diary, and here we learn a lot about the production process behind this movie. Firstly, it seemed that many people from different studios had many ideas behind what to do, with some interesting or odd ideas like having Greg be the only person who's a cartoon, having Greg be an adult but everyone else is a child, and all sorts of ideas. Of course, many were rejected because they either didn't fit the movie's direction, or they were just, well, bad ideas. They were just bad ideas. I honestly think more things about film production and the filmmaking process need to be published because people are pretty ignorant of how a movie is made. I mean, some people don't even know how long of a process color coding a movie can be. Because yes, making sure all the color levels in a movie are 100% accurate to the director's vision is an incredibly important process. I would know, I do it a lot. The director for the first film is Thor Freudenthal, who hasn't really directed much, but he did direct the film adaptation of Percy Jackson's Sea of Monsters. I mean, that's not a great movie, but he did make movies after this one. The director of the last two films is David Bowers, and he has a much stronger track record with movies like Flushed Away and Astro Boy. Of course, he also made Diary of a Wimpy Kid: The Long Haul, but nobody's perfect. The casting directors on these movies are Rona Kress, Heike Brandstatter, and Corinne Mayers. And while I haven't mentioned casting directors in past videos that I've made, I want to highlight them here because they seriously did a great job. Every actor here feels like they've been ripped straight out of the source material. Casting direction is a really underappreciated element of film, and I should speak about it more in the future. As for the writers, well, there's a different group of writers for each movie, all of which aren't really big names to mention. Not that they did a bad job, in fact they all did pretty good jobs, but when each film switches its writing team every single time, it's kinda hard to talk about them. As for the cast themselves, most of the actors are either new and up-and-comers at the time of the film's production, with the occasional movie star like Steve Zahn as Frank Heffley. Interestingly, the actor for Greg, Zachary Gordon, wanted the part so bad that he made it his 11th birthday wish. It's honestly kinda sweet that he got his dream come true. I hope he's doing well today. Much of the cast had done previous acting work, but it was usually acting for the stage or smaller productions before leaping into film. The interesting thing about this process is that they did many things for everyone to get into their roles. I mean, I know many productions do that, but I haven't heard of asking your lead stars to write essays from their characters' perspectives to get them into the character's headspace. And yet, it's a pretty genius idea. I'd consider it a fun acting experiment to say the least, but they also had fun together to get comfortable with each other, like setting up a bowling night for all the cast so they could build friendships off screen. That way, they'd all be more comfortable and get genuine chemistry on camera. Oh, and also they casted a pair of twins to play Manny. Now, I know that sounds odd, but it's actually a very common practice to cast twins in roles where they require a very young child. That way, when one kid gets tired, they could swap in the identical twin and keep doing that until the shooting gets done. It's a pretty smart workaround since you don't want to overwork a literal toddler. As for the location of the film, they settled on shooting in Vancouver, which doesn't surprise me in the slightest. Do you know how many American productions are filmed in Canada? Hell, I'll tell you right now, most films set in New York are most likely shot in either Toronto or Vancouver. The book itself calls Vancouver Hollywood North, which is pretty accurate on how shooting and location works. One thing you probably didn't know about this movie is that there's actually a lot of digital effects work that goes on in these films. For one, the animated segments are actually done in 3D, but are made to mock 2D animation. Even the cheese is a digital effect because, let's be real, you don't want an actual rotten slice of cheese on set. That would be awful for everyone involved. So as you can see, these movies weren't made as cheaply as possible and then just dumped out into theaters. There was a large budget and effort behind these movies. Everything came together from the effects to the costumes to everything else combined together for the movies you see today. But I think I've talked a lot about the creation process. Let's start by talking about the movies. Starting with Diary of a Wimpy Kid. First things first, I think it's only fair to mention how the movie looks. It's very well shot. Like, it's not the most experimental or most boundary-pushing cinematography, but there's a lot of good shots in this movie. Personally, I always think of the shot with Greg and Rodrick with the door separating the two of them. On paper, this sounds like an easy shot to pull off, but think about it. There's supposed to be a door there as well as a wall. The amount of planning and practical effects work that had to be done just for this couple-second shot must have been tremendous. And yet, it was pulled off sublimely. The editing of the movie is also super smooth, usually being well paced with how it transitions, occasionally adding in rapid cuts like an Edgar Wright movie. For reference, Edgar Wright is the director behind Shaun of the Dead, Baby Driver, and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Anyways, visually they portray the story well, but we all know what we're here for. The characters, of which the cast is all great. The cast really does portray these characters very well. As I said earlier, they feel like they've been ripped straight out of the books. I mean, it's not literally one for one, obviously, but if these were supposed to be the real versions of Greg's cartoons, I can feasibly see that. Of course, the two main characters of this film are Greg and Raleigh. with a revolving cast of secondary characters weaved in and out of the plot when they become relevant. No character overstays their welcome, and I think every character leaves an impact when they're on screen. Zachary Gordon's work as Greg is pretty much iconic at this point. No, I really mean it. He wanted this role so badly and it shows. He perfectly portrays this wimpy, self-centered kid so well, but he layers in just enough charm that you can't outright hate him. The writers in Gordon make you understand Greg, and while sure, everyone can admit Greg sucks throughout this whole movie, you could still empathize with him. You could tell that most of his shitty behavior comes from a place of insecurity, and what 12-year-old wasn't insecure? As for Robert Capron as Rowley, this was also perfect casting. On paper, Rowley could easily be the most obnoxious character in this film. He's incredibly naive and a bit unaware at times. Honestly, in the wrong hands, this could have ended up like later seasons of SpongeBob. A character that is supposed to be fun could end up incredibly frustrating to watch in the wrong hands. Luckily, Capron gives Rowley this sort of whimsical nature to his character. Like, he could see the good in everyone and he genuinely enjoys life, but the writers also give him enough self-respect to know when to cut something off, still grounding him in reality enough to not make him look completely stupid. The star character of this movie, to me though, is probably Rodrick. He just has so many quotables and moments that I find pretty hilarious. Though one of the secondary characters I also have to highlight here is Patty Farrell. Not because she's important to the plot or anything, I just want to bring her up because the writers and actress made her one of the most hateable characters I've ever seen on screen. I mean seriously, Greg is an ass for most in the movie, but Patty is the worst. She's pompous, vindictive, and entitled beyond all belief. I mean, Greg gave a showstopper performance for his audition, and Patty steals the starring role from him because she thinks she deserves to be the star, even threatening the theater teacher with her mother's PTA position. Like, holy shit. I don't think I've ever wanted to slap a child in the face so badly. Great job, Lane McNeil. I don't know if you're still doing work today, but your work here was phenomenal. You really got down the sense of a very entitled, bratty kid in the most honestly frustrating way possible. The plot of the movie, though, is very tightly woven. It's essentially a collection of brief vignettes, but with elements of an overarching narrative or stories slid inside to make it seem like an interconnected story. In a sense, it has a slice of life feeling, but also still is leading the audience down the path to have a proper climax. It gives us a strong sense of Greg's world and how he feels. In a sense, this movie almost feels like a character study of Greg's insecurities and how they can make him do unkind things to his best friend. It's not a character study in the traditional sense, mostly using Greg's nature to formulate comedy, but there are genuine moments of drama dragged from it too, even if it's more mundane drama. The build-up to Rowley cutting off Greg's friendship is completely deserved. Greg, in his own arrogance, was essentially trying to turn Rowley into himself, which is ironic because he fails to see that he isn't exactly the most popular person either. He sees all of Rowley's positives as a potential problem, and yet those are actually the traits that allows Rowley to succeed. His lack of superficialness is what makes him popular, and Greg just can't see that. Honestly, my only real minor gripe with the plot comes at the ending. I'll admit the heavy air quotes fight between Greg and Rowley is funny and earned, yet a group of adults just randomly deciding to appear on a school property and make Rowley eat the cheese seems like a bit of forced drama. And yes, I do know these characters appeared earlier in the movie, but this just doesn't make sense for any of them to do in my opinion. Now, when Greg takes the heat for eating the cheese, that feels earned. We've seen how guilty he feels about the way he treated Rowley, and really, it is a well-earned moment to complete his character arc about being less superficial. I just wish it felt a little less forced, because it kind of feels like they needed a way to tie the adults from earlier in the film to make them feel into a nice tied loop on the plot, and yet I can't help but feel like there might have been a better way to handle this. So, that's all I want to say about the first movie, but I know what you're really all excited for. That movie being, of course, is Rodrick Rules is possibly the most beloved and iconic movie from this entire trilogy. It was definitely the one I watched the most on DVD. It was one of those movies I'd watch when I was sick and had to stay home from school, along with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man and Disney's Hercules. I don't know why, those were just the movies I liked to watch when I was sick, I guess. Anyway, this was the movies when they switched directors from Thor Frudenhall to David Bowers. And man, the visuals are even better in this movie. Even as a kid, I could tell this was a huge visual upgrade. From the very first shot of everyone appearing as a drawing first, then getting erased to reveal the real actor underneath was chef's kiss. But there's even some great shots other than that in this movie. Like this one segment where Greg is stuck in the old lady's bathroom. The way the light from the crack in the bathroom stall hits Greg's eye is pretty visually appealing. Then cutting over to the crack in the door for the eyeball jump scare is a visual treat. Of course, the editing is generally similar, with even more cutaway gags I've noticed in this movie. Not that I'm complaining, I think cutaway gags can be great when done with some reservation. I'm looking at you, later seasons of Family Guy. I especially love the editing decisions when Rodrick's giving advice to Greg on laziness. They cut it together like an old kung fu film with a lot of crash zooms and ending in a lot of kung fu SFX. Really, it's a scene that could have just been normal and kind of boringly cut, yet they added in so much of this character that's kind of out of character for the movie, but it adds in just that nice layer of comedy. As for the characters, you could see a real growth within Greg. He seems a bit more confident in this movie, but he isn't completely shed his superficial elements. But unlike in the previous movies, they're dialed way down. Now he doesn't completely shit on Rowley for being himself, but he'll still get embarrassed because that's just who he is. Of course, I said Rodrick was my favorite character from the last movie, and here he's even better. I mean, I think he has so many great moments and quotables in this movie alone. I think anyone else can remember the iconic scene from the movie.
Does he know about the D.O.R.E.? Huh? The door.
But you also get a real feel for Rodrick. He's the classic trope of the likable slacker. And how he explains how he became this lazy, I mean, do you blame him? I mean, he's not even really lazy, he's just found ways to do far less work and spend more time doing what he wants to do. Now, if you call that lazy or intelligent, let me know. You feel the brothers build up a genuine bond. There's a lot of moments where they feel like actual brothers. They argue over small things and bond over simple stuff. If this were a much less confident movie, it would have made their moment of bonding be some large moment somewhere at the end of the movie. But instead, they sprinkle some earnest moments throughout the plot. I especially love the scene where the two brothers are just pranking a bunch of people with fake vomit. It's so mundane, but it's also so honest, because really it is those small incidental moments that you'll somehow end up remembering. Yet, what this movie does, much better than the previous movie, is that it has a much better building tension. Sure, the first movie had the cheese and the cheese touch, but it was kind of just in the background for the whole movie, being hinted at, but never really being fully acted upon. But here, the whole fear of Rodrick or Greg getting in trouble for throwing a party is palpable. The writers also made an incredibly smart choice by having Greg and Rodrick have to hide the fact they had to replace a door because of how wild the party was. Every second whenever a character notices the lock is gone is yet another moment of high tension, because you know someone's gonna put it together. And when Greg has a moment where he does blow it, his mother keeps it between them, which is interesting because now this makes an interconnected web of lies that you know will hurt everyone when it collapses under its own weight. Then when it does happen, it hurts like hell. We've now seen these two build a real, genuine bond. So when Greg is the person to embarrass himself so that Rodrick gets out of trouble, it's a beautiful moment. It's a similar moment to Greg taking the blame from the last movie, but given a much stronger weight. Everything in this movie has a perfect bow tied at the end. All the little plot details come back and matter greatly. Even the whole gag about them trying to make a popular YouTube video makes it back into the plot. Man, Greg's first video only has like 4 views. I can't relate to that at all. Anyways, I think we all get why Rodrick Rules is great, because I don't really need to say any more. It's the best film in the trilogy, but it is a trilogy, so who knows? Maybe the third movie could get better. Let's talk about that third movie. That third movie, and the finale of the trilogy, being Dog Days is the third and final film of the original trilogy of Wimpy Kid films. And sadly, I actually think it's the weakest. It's not a bad film, not by any means, but it feels like this movie is a bit muddled. Visually, this movie is very similar to Rodrick Rules, probably because it shares the same director. So all the compliments I gave to that movie also apply here. Character-wise, I'd say everyone here is still solid, but oddly enough, I feel like Rodrick has gotten a bit of a downgrade here. Maybe it's because he got so much focus in the last movie, but here he comes off now as a wacky older brother rather than the complex, fun-loving slacker of the last movie. As for Greg himself, he's still great and seems a bit more mature in this movie. And no, it's not because his voice got deeper. He seems to be more open to talking about others with how he feels, and there's even moments here where he absolutely admits he's been lying. But the main focus of the movie, at least the way the movie presents it, is Greg's dad, Frank, and their relationship. And I don't really think it's focused on enough. This movie feels like it's juggling 3 main plot lines instead of one main story with little vignettes around it. Sure, everything ends up tying back to Greg and his dad's relationship, but you don't get as much time to sit with it because you have to deal with the Greg plotline with Rowley and his plotline with Holly Hills. Of course, one is stagnant because Holly isn't really a character outside of, I'm a nice girl, and Rowley's issue with Greg is solved in like 10 minutes. Really, the plotline that should be the main one feels like it only gets focused in the first 10 minutes of the movie and then the last 20 minutes. which is about 1/3 of the entire film. And the crazy part is, these parts are the best parts of the movie. I love the scene where Greg's mom speaks to Frank about not taking away what their kids love. Frank saying he doesn't want to force things onto his kids like his dad. Of course, he eventually does it anyway, but when it's on screen and we're allowed to see it, it's a really good arc of the movie. The camping scenes are the best part of the movie. You see in these moments that Frank and Greg are super alike. You put the pieces together that Frank is only acting like this because this is how his dad treated him. He also wanted his son to be a traditional outdoorsy, heavy air quotes, masculine man, yet he probably just wanted to do fun history stuff like build dioramas and do reenactments. And these parts of the movie are genuinely great. I just wish we had more time to really dive into that. Maybe see Frank's relationship with his father, and maybe we could see more into that element of Frank's character. The best scene of this movie is when Frank and Greg ditch the campsite and eat pizza at a hotel. It's honest, and they both admit to each other that they both hate camping. They've given each other the room to understand and accept one another. Sure, they might not always see eye to eye, but they get each other much better now. I don't see this movie as bad, but I think you get what I mean when it has kind of a missed potential moment. And if you're gonna say, but that wasn't in the book, bro, half of what's in Rodrick Rules is unique to that movie too, so shut up! I do think though that if I had to end the trilogy on any note, it would be this movie, because while it's not as tightly plotted together like the last two, it at least leaves on a pretty positive note. And we do see a lot of growth in Greg. He's still not perfect, not by a long shot, but Frank lets his son know that's okay, even giving his son some wisdom on that, saying what his grandpa used to say, a man who never made a mistake never made anything. But the trick is to be responsible and learn from your mistakes. And I believe that's the perfect note to end this trilogy on. So, after all that, what makes these movies so special? Why do they hold such a strong presence for so many people? And I think after rewatching all three of these movies, I think I have the answer. We all as kids knew Greg. What I mean is, we at least knew someone like Greg, or maybe we were Greg. A lot of kids' media always tries to focus on the beauty of childhood, treating it like this sacred thing. And while that's partly true, Diary of a Wimpy Kid is a lot more honest. It showed us that, yeah, kids do kinda suck. They can be rude, superficial, judgmental, and make incredibly poor decisions. And yet, we all needed to see that. We're never ever going to be these perfect golden children. We're messy, we grow, we make mistakes, and these movies were all about that. It uses comedy to give the kids watching a safe space to see and even poke fun at the kind of people we shouldn't be. In a sense, what maybe was intended to be parody in the books became a sincere place of relatability in the movie adaptations. While I don't think relatability is the metric we should judge a good piece of art on, I think this was the Wimpy Kid film's greatest strength. It was a guidebook on how to give yourself room to be honest with yourself. And that's what makes the Diary of a Wimpy Kid films the GOATed trilogy. And yeah, that's all I really gotta say. There's a lot to talk about with these movies because they are important to a lot of people, including me. These were a major part of my childhood as well as many other kids around my age. And at first I thought maybe it was just nostalgia for why I like these movies, but over time you learn that nostalgia can be right, as well as be horrifically wrong. I'm just glad in this case scenario, it was more right than wrong. But what did you think of the video? Did you like it? Did you not? Do you think I'm a moron? Do you think I'm a genius? Let me know in the comments below. And with all that being said, I'll see you next time.